Well, first of all, I'm so happy to be at the Product Elevation Conference. Thank you very much. Today, we're going to talk about how to do repeatable product innovation. I see the slides are still good. So, the reason I sort of developed this talk was I saw a phenomenon happening in the product industry. And the phenomenon was that, people would start really well. So startups have this superpower of understanding their customer, really being close to the pain, to the problem. And then beyond those first few iterations, sometimes people stumble, right? And they're not, they bring on people who are not experts. They try to grow their team to people who are not the founders. And sometimes people sort of stumble and they stop capturing the innovation and excitement that people had before. And so the challenge of scale and increasing success is to do this in a repeatable way. And so this is what I call capturing lightning in a bottle, right? So before I jump in, though, I hear you guys are a lovely audience. I'd love to see your chat and your feedback as we go so we can make it as interactive as possible, even though it's remote. My name is Udezue, and I'll be speaking to you about product systems. Well, first, let me tell you a little bit about myself, right? Like like the introduction, I'm the product lead for creation and conversations at Twitter, which means tweets, spaces, communities, DMs, and the creators that we're attracting to the platform. I'm not speaking on behalf of Twitter, though. I'm speaking about myself, all right? And no, I can't verify your account because even I don't have a verified account, even though those teams work for me right now, because we have clear rules about how to do that. So, by the way, that's a joke. I think of myself primarily as a product person. I've led product teams and design teams for the last 6 years. Occasionally, I've actually also led engineering teams. And I've sort of, done some marketing, sales enablement, etc. So a very hopefully well-rounded product person, but I love to build things. And that's the most important thing to me. I've also built a company. I've been a founder. And I spent a lot of time mentoring fast-growing startups, early-stage startups, and doing some M&A. The reason I'm saying all these things is not to sort of brag or anything. It's just more to tell you where I'm coming from, and the perspective I share that makes me sort of interested to talk about this stuff. I'm ex-Atlassian, ex-Calendly, ex-Microsoft. Microsoft was where I really started to become a product person. I worked in a lot of teams there. These are a sampling of them with Microsoft Research as well. And it was a very productive time, a time to learn what it meant to build things. Now, I've learned so much more since I left Microsoft because I think it wasn't as customer-centric a company as I've become over the last decade. But I still remember all that stuff with great fondness, especially my time at Windows. So the main takeaway you should have from this talk is that as a product leader, or in fact, any kind of product professional at whatever elevation, the main product you have is the team itself, right? The team is your product. Even though I have like 14 patents, I've built a lot of things myself. The one thing I think about right now is how do I empower a team to make amazing things that change the world? And even if they don't do that, to solve a problem for my customer. There's this idea that I have that I talk about on my teams called the shipyard. Okay. Now, we hear a lot of supply chain problems out there in the world right now. So just imagine in your mind what it takes to sort of clear a dock in Los Angeles, in Glasgow, wherever it is, right, that is part of global trade, and all the orchestration that needs to happen to make that really work really well. And it's a huge amount. So in a shipyard, there's so many people doing all the right things together to make things work. And that's sort of a perfect analogy for sort of the R&D team inside a software company. There's a lot going on, and you as a product leader obviously, luckily you're part of the product management team, maybe part of the design team, but you really need to think about the orchestration of everything, the engineers, the designers, the product people, and lately the support people and the product marketing people as well. So you need a clear product. This is what's called a system. You need a clear product strategy for shaping the team to be lean, mean, fighting force, right? If you don't pay attention to this, you will get into a lot of chaos. Parts of the team run differently, produce things. Part of the team doesn't run really well and produces things that are suboptimal. Now, I don't actually love the idea of process, right? Which is why I don't use that word well when I talk about systems of innovation. As an individual PM, I was always sort of trying to be 0 to 1, very startup-y. But one key anti-pattern, right, for scrappy startup teams is nailing things and then not nailing it later, right? And you find that every really good product company has a product system. If you think of Spotify, where squads, who popularized squads, GitLab around working remotely, Atlassian, the kinds of things I did at Calendly, you'll find that most companies that do well have a kind of system. So there's power in creating that. So what is a system, by the way? Just a planned, thoughtful approach for accomplishing your product goals. And in this conversation, in this talk, I'm just going to walk you 3 key elements you need to think about. They need to be well considered, conscious in creating a product system. Now, I'm going to say this at the end of the talk, but I'll say this one time in the beginning. because we shouldn't be, because what we do shouldn't be about process, right? The most important thing to know about your product system is that it is the floor for innovation, right? It shouldn't be calcified. It shouldn't be something that's written down and becomes a Bible. It should be the floor for innovation. You should think about it as a product leader for sure, but you should empower people around you, even like ordinary people in the system, in the shipyard, should be able to make things better. You can't see everything, and you live in a dynamic environment. And therefore, if you don't give it life, if it doesn't have veins and it doesn't have blood pumping through it, and people can't improve it, you're going to have something that people hate in a short amount of time. Okay, so let's jump in. You can define this any way you want, but I think there are 3 key systems to think through, right? One is a system of people, one is a system of direction setting, and one is a system of execution, right? System of people is really, what does it take to get the most out of the people that you have, right? And how do you coach them? How do you make them better? How do you set up a sense of purpose for them so that they stick around so they can do more innovation? Something you need to think through. Systems of direction setting is really critical, right? This is literally in what direction, what challenges do you pick to go after? And how do those challenges translate into really great products? How do they translate into sorry, excuse me, I have a technical glitch here. How do they translate into apologies, people. Can everyone still see me? Can everyone still see me? All right, perfect. Sorry, apologies. I had a little bit of a glitch here. So back to what I was saying. So systems of direction are about picking the challenges that will cause your customers to be well off and your company to be well off. And the last one is just systems of execution. How do you get to good every single time, right? And this is a huge part of the product system that you have to design, right? The next step here then is I'm going to jump into the system for people, right? The question for leaders in the room, right? And if we have access to chat here, is what is your approach? How do you connect to your people? How do you connect to their skills and ambitions, right? How are you designing an organization that gets the most out of them? What do you think about? Can people just jump in maybe with a little bit of chat, like how they think about people, how they try to optimize for people? Right. I'm looking at the comments here. If you have access, go ahead and do that. I'll be watching and referring to those. But the value created with a good people system is just leveraging the best out of your talent. How do you get 120% from people? How do you get them connected in a way that's not just about money? It's about mastery. It's about purpose. Those are all the things that you have to think about in the system of people. The most expensive and the most important resource you have is those people. So you should work over time to keep them valued, motivated, right, inspired, and productive. Right now, one of the key people that you need to work with if you're in a large enough company is a business partner. It's funny, this weekend I was at an offsite with all the leaders on my team. Because of the pandemic, we haven't sort of spent a lot of time together, and we were trying to create the bonds that would help us sort of innovate, that help us trust each other. So the first thing to think about is your org designed for mission, for really accomplishing the goals that you've set out, right? Now, the mental model you should have is sort of a general, right? Like a military, right? And your organization should be designed to do that. So do you have a triad? So you have a design, PM, and engineering. Do you have a GM type thing where you sort of go after something with a very well blended team of one key leader? These are all things that you have to consider when you think about, is your org designed for mission? First of all, this is huge, right? If you don't sort of sort these things out, if it just falls into place, sometimes you can't actually accomplish the goals that you have. I've been in a lot of companies where sort of org design is emergent versus deliberate. And the actual difference between what I'm talking about is being deliberate versus being emergent. The next thing you have to think about is how to map the roles in your organization. When you go to the next level of how the actual organization is structured, the thing you have to think about is not to think about individuals that you already have. It's like, what is required to make this work? This is very, very important. In half of the cases I see, people try to map and work around the people that they have. I encourage you right now, don't do that. Try to create an organization that can accomplish its goals and then slot people inside it, right? And that way, even though there are some people with key skills that are important to think about, you sort of balance their interests and the organization's interests. The next thing I want to talk about is hiring, assessing, and assignment. And I'll do this by sort of giving you a sort of an analogy of how I've done it in the past. So one of the things I think about when I think about product managers is I think about what makes a good one, right? Right now, I've got it down to 5 things, right? Creativity, leadership, communication, ability to drive results, right? And PM craft. There are all kinds of things that PMs need to do, running a good meeting, driving clear decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So 5 things, right? And for each of those things, like I have a clear sense of what the first stage looks like, second stage, third stage. I'm thinking about a career stage. But not only that, when we interview people, we interview them across those 5 dimensions as well. So what we have in my teams is a clear path between how people come into the organization and how they grow in the organization. So it's super consistent, right? And we can give people consistent feedback that makes them better across those 5 dimensions. So that's what I mean by hire, assess, and assign, is that you need to have a clear sense, just like I just described to you, how people come into the organization and how they become better, right? And what you assign them to and what responsibilities that they grow into. And then the last one is coaching and evaluation. Another system that I think about really well. And it's something I'm actually facing right now. I try to construct an organization to be like a normal curve. Like all of you who are in math and engineering should understand what a normal curve is. And in the normal curve, there are people very early on in their careers, right, on one edge, at the mean of people mid-career, and at the other side of the outliers are people who are very, very senior in the organization. The reason I do this, and this is my system, is that it's easy for the organization to mentor itself naturally. So uh, um, there's not too much pressure on all the leadership, right? But you have people essentially cascade mentoring across the organization. So you should come up with your own theories on how to coach and evaluate people, right? How to design an organization that can coach itself as well. Now, there are other things to consider. Do you sort of create incentives for managers or for leads to coach people every month? Is it every quarter? I definitely don't recommend annual sort of conversations about people's careers, those things. Regardless of what you decide, you should have a clear sense of how this happens. 90% of an employee experience is the manager experience. And the manager experience is designed by these conscious decisions of people in product leadership to make it easy for people to have conversations about how they can get better, what challenges they need to overcome, et cetera, et cetera. So that's about as much time as I will spend on systems of people. But suffice it to say that this is one of the most important things you can do. If you have good people, if they're satisfied, if they have purpose, you can have a chance at creating amazing things. So the next thing I want to talk about is direction setting. Okay. How do you set direction for your organization? So I'm going to talk about high and low versions of this, right? There is strategic direction and there is sort of everyday functional direction. And for each of those things, you do need to be opinionated about how they can be accomplished, right? One of the things I tell PMs, but I'll maybe tell everybody, is that ultimately we're paid for or rewarded. I don't want to say paid because obviously some of us are building startups, et cetera. We are rewarded for making good decisions quickly, right? Basically, if I make 90% of my decisions are good and I make them twice as fast as you, I can have a better outcome. I can have better outcomes in products. I can have better outcomes in speed to market, et cetera, et cetera. So direction setting is hugely important because it affects the throughput and how right the organization is in the context of building amazing things. So can everyone still hear me? Can I see that? Can someone just paste, because it's hard to get feedback. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so okay, let's jump in. Direction setting. There are 5 things I think about in terms of direction setting at the highest level, right? And then I'll talk about sort of the low level as well. One is a shared reference. What environment are you in? Okay, that is important. It's a very important thing to establish, whether it's a company level or the feature level, what is the environment we live in, right? It can be competitive, it can be cooperative, but no one lives and no feature or no product lives in sort of a vacuum. So you need to have a clear reference of the situation around a company, around the product or feature. Okay, so the next one is clear problems to be solved. Like every team has to have a really clear sense of what are we trying to solve to create the most leverage, right? The next one is how do we decide? How do we decide clearly what to do, right? About what problems we solve. So generally that comes down to which problem matters most, which is creates the most opportunity, et cetera, right? And the next one is creating options. This is thinking about what solution methodologies should we go after, right? And the last one is making sure that once you've decided that the organization can focus on that relentlessly, right? One of the anti-patterns you see here is that there's no real shared reference. People don't agree on problems to be solved. People don't understand how to make a decision. And individuals or separate teams go to try to solve multiple of these problems at the same time, and it creates chaos. But the truth is, an organization lives in a world of scarcity of focus, right? And the most important thing to think about in terms of setting strategy or setting direction is, where do we focus? And how are we all bought into that focus? And so shared reference, problem to be solved, criteria for decision, creating options, and having clear sign off and buy-in is really, really important to be able to create amazing things. So let's make this concrete, okay? How do you do these things? The first one is you sort of expand, right? I remember trying to build a feature at Calendly around scheduling for interviews. And we took a month to figure out the state of the world for this business that we wanted to go into because we were not experts at it, right? We called, heads of recruiting. We tore down competitive products. We talked to agencies. We talked to all kinds of people to understand the universe we're playing in, because from the outside, things aren't obvious, right? You have to go deep, right? And then, one of the things we try to do is like, what's the most critical problem to solve in this space? And also we sort of peeked into the future, like 5 years from now, if everything is solved, what does this look like? What are we shooting for, right? And so that was a very, very important step. And then we all had to sort of agree, how do we make a decision on which of these problems to go after? In that case, it's that was, pretty simple. It was me and the CEO who basically had to decide what those things were. But in order to sort of get buy-in, we had to have a clear criteria so we could communicate to the people. And the last one is we had to walk through several options on how to attack this market, right? Defining how we would go after this, right? And then once that's done, we had to make sure that everyone in the organization understood the clear path we'd chosen, and we could communicate that. Now, I want to say something about sort of sign off on buy-in in terms of setting direction. This is the hardest thing to do, right? When I think about sign off on buy-in, I think about writing stuff down, right? So that everyone can see it. This is so powerful. I can't say enough about that. The second thing I think about is that you have to repeat yourself all the time. People aren't paying as much attention as you want. So you really need to say, here's what we've decided, here's what we're doing, over and over again, like all hands meetings, emails, whatever it is, right? So that everyone can be on the same page. And by the way, people who are experienced here also know that it's not just about the shipyard, right? There are people in sales who need to be bought in. There are people in support who need to be bought in. And they need to understand the internal logic of the plan that you've made. Everyone, hopefully in your organization, is smart. And so it's not enough to say, here's where we're going. It's more important to unpack why. And so that people can follow this sort of system all the way back to the bottom of what's the original problem, what's the original situation that we're in. If you can do this well, you'll have an organization that is really well aligned. People who are not creating eddies of energy in different directions because they see it. Now, this is not the same as people questioning whether we did the right thing. I think everyone should always have an organization that does this. But the thing that's arbitrary is when they can't see why, right? If you can say the why is flawed and we should change it because here's what we're seeing in the market, then you should absolutely consider that. This is not a way to shut down dissent, but this is a way to get alignment. I'll say this again, the most critical thing about systems of direction is that they be documented and they should be visible, they should be observable. If you can do that, you can do almost anything when it comes to direction setting. The last thing I'm going to spend time on is talking about a system of execution. By the way, I'm going to stop for a second and say, this will play out in very different ways in different organizations. What I'm sort of laying out to you are 3 buckets and a structured way to think about how to do systems of innovation. And I'm not even saying that you have to do a checklist or anything like that, but I'm saying that you have to answer critical questions about each of these things. If you can answer yes, well thought through, yes, well thought through to these things, you will be able to have a way to do repeatable innovation. So let's jump into systems of execution. So execution feels obvious, right? This is all the things you do to go from all the way from idea to customer value, right? And I don't even want to say idea. I want to say customer pain to customer value, because customer pain should be the bedrock, the foundation of most of our ideas. So these are methodologies and approaches that help reduce execution risk, that make execution high quality. There's no single way to do product execution, but I will point out things that you need to think about to help you do this better, right? And help keep your organization accountable. So let's jump into this. There are three things I think about and I think you should think about. One is, how do you manage resources, right? And how do you assign resources to any given bet, to anything that you want to do, right? You have to do this constantly and you have to reevaluate. One is, how do you develop and run a playbook? What does your playbook look like? How do you actually build stuff, right? And the last one, also related to system of directions, how do you align your organization according to these sort of decisions in the first two areas, okay? So here's what this translates to. Here's the questions you have to answer. Can we do this, right? When you go back again to managing resources, can we do it and should we do it? And who should do it, okay? The second one is, how will we do it? And the third one is, what is the plan? And does everyone sort of understand that? And are you doing that effectively? So a couple of things to think about in managing resources. How much discretionary capacity do you have? So one thing that every product team should think about is, how much time do we spend and how much of our business is about running the infrastructure we have, right? So identifying that, whether it's 20% or 40%, and then making sure that that part is protected, and so that you can take the other 80% or 60% to do new innovative stuff. There's also the idea that you should also think about how to grow innovation in general. One of the things that I think about with this discretionary capacity I have is I try to spend 70% working on the core product. I try to spend 20% of that capacity working on expanding the value proposition, maybe attacking new markets or adjacent markets. Then I try to take 10% and work on what I call moonshots, right? So identifying discretionary capacity and really figuring out how to use it, okay? Now, with your discretionary capacity, you're thinking about investments and bets. Who goes where, right? One of the things I think about is, just as an example, is for the bets that we have, I wait till they are successful or showing at least signs of success. And also the teams are stable. They're running the playbook. And once they feel like they are like 80, 90%, then I think about the next new bets to make, right? Or I think about doubling down on the bets we have because they're showing so much promise. So how do you balance that investment and bet? So I don't spin up new teams that will be unsuccessful, right? That are speculative, that don't have enough resources. It's just a waste of time. So we don't do those. And the last one is managing dependencies. And this is really key because one of the things that kills teams is they try to do too much, which related to the first point. So can you actually build what you need to do and deal with the ways that the teams depend on each other? And, if you have an infrastructure team, a platform team, etc. So these are all the ways that you need to be constrained. Like right now, I'm dealing with this at Twitter, where I've over-resourced in one organization and not in the other. And some of it is historical, and I have to deal with the consequences of it at the moment. And so these are the three things you think about when you're thinking about managing resources. The next one is running the playbook. I'm going to be very quick with this one. The playbook is really just what frameworks inform most of what we do, right? At Twitter, one key framework we think about is we think about our business as sort of a country. How do we attract people into the economy of our country? The other key framework we think about is the weight of creation. We're always working to give people easier ways to express themselves with less calories, with just less effort, right? These are key frameworks that have governed a lot of what we do. I'm just naming two, by the way. This is just an example, right? But you have to sort of identify the 3, 4, 5 frameworks that sort of guide how you think about the challenges in your business. The next one is rituals. I have key meetings for PM to select key bets we make that happen every week. Design has the same thing. I have a meeting with my leadership, which is just sort of all the managers across the organization. So we have these key rituals that run all the time that keep the organization running really well. You have to have some of those. Tools is really simple. What are the 5, 6, 7 tools you use, especially in a remote world, that sort of circumscribe knowledge sharing, circumscribe direction setting, circumscribe how you communicate, and making sure you agree on that. And then methods is really, really about how do you hand off? Like, at Calendly, we had a way to work with marketing that was very specific. Everyone loved it. It made things smooth, and it helped integrate product marketing into product. Because before, it was all handoff. We'd build stuff and we hand it off to marketing to tell the story, and it wasn't working. So by building a specific method, we allow them to walk alongside us from day one. And so telling the story of the product became a ton easier. The last one is just aligning the organization. And here's where you talk a little bit about what kind of OKR, what kind of framework do you have in terms of OKRs, right, and outcomes? Do you use a squad? How do people negotiate dependencies, and how do they agree? How do they prioritize once they have a clear goal? So you need to think about those things that allow a team to sort of work well by itself, but in other teams as well. So I'm going to step back because we are at 30 minutes and say, one of the key things is there's a lot of early success people have, and people who are early in a company are sort of superheroes. And they do a lot of things, and there's very little process and there's very little system. And sometimes they figure stuff out. We know also a lot of people fail, but when people figure stuff out without a system, one way to scale repeatable excellence is to think about how to create a product system. You can't always guarantee absolutely the talent that you have, but if you think about your system, you can make ordinary people do extraordinary things through a product system and allow you to innovate consistently. Another thing I would say at the beginning, I'd say at the end is, I hate process. I think when I think about things, I think about just enough to prevent people from being miserable, for prevent people from bumping into each other. Like I see my role as paving an autobahn so that people can drive fast cars over. So one way that I guarantee that, and I don't create calcified processes, is I think of processes as a floor of excellence. And I open up these systems to be edited by almost anyone who is smarter than me in the organization. And there's a lot of people, because that's my goal. And if you allow a product system to be edited by smart people who can make it better and better, then starting with a product system is just the beginning of excellence. It's not the end of it. And every so often, whether it's every month or every quarter, you look around and say, hey, where are people doing better than what we said? And how can we make that the new standard, right? And this is a very, very important concept when you think about product systems. So there's a lot here. Hopefully, I'm not giving you like something super prescriptive. I've tried to give anecdotes from my experience, but also clearly the waypoints, the markers that you need to think through to get to a repeatable system that allows you to do product excellence. And with that, that's it. That's me. And I'm happy to take any questions right now.
Thanks for your very interesting view of how things could be repeatable. The innovation was amazing, like the kind of big level, high level, and then how you go more deeper in this in each aspect, in each system or subsystem. And I have a first question is related to the how do you help people in your organization not to jump directly into solutions? It's like while listening to you, you mentioned, okay, let's evaluate let's define the criteria for decision and then create options. And sometimes we tend to jump directly into solutions. How do you deal and help with that?
That's a good question, and this is very, very hard, and it's hard for me. I just want to have a lot of empathy for people who think about this. I think there are a few tricks. One is force people to come up with multiple solutions. So every time people come up with one solution, I say, no. What else did you consider? What are the opportunity costs? Right? Because people who tend to jump to solutions jump to one solution, right? The only thing worse than jumping to solutions quickly is jumping to one. The question is, what are the other ones? What else did you consider, right? And did you have a debate? Like part of the product system that I build is product trust, where people come to a trusted set of believable product people in the organization and say, here's the why of what I want to do, and here's maybe a solution to it. And that forum repeats itself every week in my organization and it allows people, your peers, to say, you got it wrong, the why is wrong, or why didn't you think about this other solution? And it's a way for us to sort of expand what's possible, right, based on the why. So in my world, I'm building literally a ritual that by default expands and forces people not to think in solutions quickly, right? And it's not just me and them talking, it's their peers. But I'm not there, that meeting still happens. Does that make sense? The second way I would suggest is do roadmaps and do roadmaps that are problems to solve, right? A lot of roadmaps are solutions. Okay. The first cut of a roadmap should be, here are the problems I will solve this quarter, this year, right? Force that. If you can force that, it sort of gives people the excuse to not think in solutions first, because you're basically forcing them to not write down solutions. So I'm sure there are 10 different ways to do this, but ritualize it. The deliverable is problems, not solutions. If you can make those things work and stick, you're well along your way.
Oh, thanks. Very clear answer. Is like very aligned also with what Bruce McCarthy talked about roadmaps oriented to outcomes or to include the problems to solve or the frustrations of customers in the roadmap.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. We have a question from the audience. Margaret says, you mentioned that the main product you have is the team itself. How do you adapt engaging with more product type skill people versus engineer dev people?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the most amazing thing in software businesses is people with product, people who think product, and it's not just PMs. Like I would take an engineer who has a really product mindset over three engineers who don't, and any day, because it means that we can have conversations from code to the customer fluidly. Um, and the way you think about solving that, I believe, is through the people system, right? How do you evaluate who comes into the organization, right? What are you looking for, right? If you interview engineers just about their code and about their algorithms and about their linked lists, then it means that you're blind to whether or not they have good product minds, right? And so it is sufficient to say, I want to attract more product type people, but then you insert product type evaluation into your interviewing system, right? And when people are already in the organization, you reward and isolate product type skill sets, right? So when you're saying here's a career ladder or whatever that is, and frankly, career ladders sound archaic and old. but everyone wants purpose. Every organization should have a clear sense, even if it's just a one page. What happens at Dev 1, Dev 2, Dev 3, Dev 4? And one of the lines and what happens at Dev 1, Dev 2 is like, at this stage, here's how you should be thinking about products. You should be working with PMs really well. In stage 2, you should be listening into research conversations and making up your own mind on what that research means. In stage 3, as a developer, you can call a customer and have a reasonable conversation with them and synthesize what they say. Right? That's what a people system looks like, because you are deliberately saying the thing we prioritize is part of a repeatable way we hire, we evaluate, we coach. And that's how I believe you can do it.
Yeah, this is very aligned with what you mentioned. That is like there are roles, and you try to hire people to have those defined roles, rather than, okay, we'll hire people and adapt the roles to the people we hire just because,
Mm-hmm.
and let's see how they perform and what they do. So very interesting, because I assume that people getting into the company can have like a more predictable path. Very interesting. So we have another question now from the audience. You mentioned that many team organization structures are emergent rather than deliberate. How often do you calibrate these team structures, and how do you decide on a structure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Wow. Thanks, Hannah. Um, so I think it's not, I don't think it's, I don't want to say it's robotic. It's not, I don't think it's a time driven thing. The deliberateness here is in considering how good it is. Okay. So if you walk into an organization, say as a leader, or even as a leader, you should put something on your to do list, which is evaluate how well the org structure is. Like, just create time to ask yourself, if I was going to rate this on a 1 to 10, what is the rating? Okay. The reason that things are emergent and they don't change is that because people don't consider that question, right, enough. So rate the organization you're in. Is it a 5? Is it a 10? Is it an 8? Okay. If it's a 5, then the to do is to change it. Okay. And that's where you decide that change needs to happen. And that's where you go back to what kind of structure makes sense, what roles make sense in the structure, how do I overlay the people in the thing. Like, so if I evaluate an organization that I come into and it's a 9, then there's no rush. I'll evaluate that again in 6 months. Right. So the important thing is to ask yourself the question and force yourself to give an answer that you feel is an honest answer. And it's not just something you do. You can go and hang out with other people in the organization. They'll tell you all the problems. And so it's not even necessary that you come up with the answer yourself. You can literally poll people and they'll tell you the answer to the problem. So how often do you calibrate? You calibrate, ask yourself the answer every quarter, every 6 months. If the answer falls below a certain threshold, set up time to change it. That's really the answer.
Excellent. Thank you. You work in a company that if something goes wrong, will be in the first page of most newspapers in the world, almost immediately. Or actually, in Twitter itself, actually. So, how do you manage the balance between the risk and the failures and the discovery and the innovation that always implies uncertainty?
That's a really good question. At Twitter, we can't really stay away from controversy all the time. If you've watched, if you there's this really good if anyone is a comic book fan, you watch the Avengers. In the Avengers 1 movie, Bruce Banner was just Bruce Banner, right? He was the Incredible Hulk, and there was this scene where they were trying to provoke him so he could turn into the Hulk, and he didn't. And in the end, when he turned into the Hulk, he said, "Look, my secret is I'm always angry." And so it's not like you're making me angry. I'm going to become the big bad Hulk. I think in Twitter, we lean into the chaos. Like everything we do attracts attention. And so what we try really well to do is to try to work from high conviction and principle on what we want to work on, right? That's one. Two, keep learning. Maybe we have blind spots and we keep our eyes open for figuring out the blind spots we don't know, because we know a lot of things that we should care about, like safety, harassment, abuse, etc. And three is we sort of evaluate risk. I'm constantly evaluating risk of leaks, risk of doing something. So it's just a muscle. Like right now, I just think about risk all the time. So I think those are the three things we try to work from: conviction and principle, right? Because principles are, if you agree on a principle, then what are you going to do? You can't break it every single time. Two is we stay learning. We keep an eye on things that we have blind spots on. And three, we think about risk all the time. In the last year, you've seen Twitter, we've started to increase the velocity of innovation. And some of it people don't always love. But our principle is work in the open, put stuff out there, get return from our customers. And we try not to pay attention to the news cycle as long as we're not hurting people and we're not hurting humanity in general. So that's what I would say.
And I promise this will be the last one. It's very, very interesting. So the last one would be related to how your development teams look at, in terms of the metrics, when they wake up and they get into at work. Do they have some? What are the metrics they look at?
Yeah.
Are they looking to big product metrics by by the part of the product they are taking care of, or are they especially looking at the dashboard of the last feature they implemented? Tell us about
Yeah. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
this, because we imagine that the metrics are helping people and the systems you mentioned to be up running and with people motivated and with a strategy, having like a GPS or so. So let us know, what do you think about this? What are the kind of
Yeah.
metrics you have that
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
look
So
often?
that's a really good question. So I'll talk about it in three very quick ways. One is, um, as part of establishing a system. Once I got here, I did an evaluation of the org, change the organization, an evaluation of our goals, and I didn't love what I saw. So I created a new goaling system. Like I said, okay, we did a lot of math, data science, statistical, ML, whatever. And I said, what are the three most important things for us to be driving to accomplish the goals of the company? So we established, say, three goals, three metrics. Okay. And so we're now using those metrics as part of our product system across the sort of the communication side of Twitter. And so there are three things we care about. Every team must be driving one of those three things or multiple of those three things. You can't just be driving anything you want, right? It's those three things. Those are the things we care about. I try to have a top-down goal, right, on those things. And then different teams take pieces of it to optimize it for that thing. And before that, people had different goals, just all over the place. And this is why it's important to have a considered system. So now there are three things we care about. If it's not those three things, why are you working on it? What does it matter? Okay. So even just the definition, hugely important, right? Hugely important. Now, the good thing about silicon and computers is that you can monitor and measure many things. Like I expect teams to have 10 different things they care about. All I care about is the ladder to those three, right? And so the way I see it in terms of our playbook is we pick something to work on, a challenge, a customer problem, and we say, here are the ways it ladders up to those top goals. Okay. Well, here are the other 10 things we're going to monitor in terms of adoption, health, abuse, all those things, right? To make sure that this is going healthy. Do I care about those 10 things? Maybe I do, right? But the team itself cares about it even more than I do. Okay. And what I want as part of the playbook is that even before the thing is launched, you already have your dashboard that monitors those 10 things, including my three, right? Waiting, blank. And so once it's launched, the data starts flowing in. So the whole team can look at it and evaluate it. So basically, you shouldn't launch anything without a metrics dashboard, period. And you should pre-create it before you launch. Because what happens is if you create it after, sometimes you game things or you come up with metrics that favor you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So your dashboard, your measuring dashboard should be ready even before you launch. And the data should just fill in. And the data is what it is. That way you evaluate with its success or not. So that last part, as part of the playbook, is what developers will wake up in the morning and look at. What is happening. And by the way, there's you don't drive products with just data, right? You drive products with qualitative information. So one of the things that we do is we have continuous discovery. Like we have panels of customers we go to consult. We do DMs with customers. We'll run an audio space and invite customers in to tell us what they're experiencing. We'll have small community tools for elite customers to come in and tell us themselves how they're experiencing a product. For example, when we launch stuff for creators, like super follows, we have a small community where they come in and tell us what's missing. And we listen to those things and listen to the reasons behind it, how it affects their workflow, and we adapt very quickly. Some of these things are much faster than watching for data and have much richer information than watching for data. And so developers have access to the raw, hard data. They also have access to talking to someone who's affected by that thing and for them to tell us how they think about it, how they use it, what it does well, what it doesn't do well. And sometimes that data is so much better, especially early on, that's what you rely on to improve the product, not just the metrics. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Oh, very interesting. So it's like when you mention the customer centric approach, it's like in the archetypes of your customers, you have you have Obama, I would say. That is, I think is the person with the most followers or so. So they you shape one part of the product and they see an interface that we do not see because they have their own customer journey with assistants or whatever that are helping them in their social networks, right? Very interesting.
Yeah, and we try not to pay attention. Twitter is the voice of the voiceless. There's no Arab Spring without Twitter, right? There's so many things in the world that are enabled by Twitter specifically. So it's not that we focus on Obama and those. When I say elite,
but it's one
I know
archetype.
when I say elite customers, I don't actually mean the celebrities at all. Like, let me give you an example. So I release super follows. Okay, it's a way for people to say, I want to pay to follow this person. And usually it's not celebrities that do this. They don't need any money. It's creators, right? People who make really interesting content. So then I'll collect maybe 100 of these creators in a community. It's not Obama. And then I will listen a lot to them. So they're early adopters. So it's not so much elite, it's early adopters that I listen to. Now, what do people like Obama represent? They represent a category of customers we call very important tweeters, right? And we have teams that already pay a lot of attention to them. So I don't actually build a product system around. We've basically already built it. We have people who sort of listen to hear the experiences of those people, and we aggregate that. What is more important to me when I'm launching something new, to go to the early adopters, collect a few of them to listen to heavily. And some of them are very normal. They're not very influential or anything, but they are the sort of the canary in the coal mine, the very early adopters, people who are telling us how to shape this. And for those people, it's not enough to just see their data roll into a data dashboard. I have to go down and listen to them. We have panels with women, people of color, like ordinary people, but we understand their influence on the platform. We want to listen to them heavily.
Okay, the importance of qualitative. Yeah. So
yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we are getting at it's the end, and we appreciate a lot your time and all the passion and all the knowledge you provide in your presentation. Thank you very much. It was a fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and good luck, everyone, for in this conference. It's a good conference. I've heard you're a good audience, and hopefully you learn a lot and have fun.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye bye.